Hi Paul, thanks for the footage. Sorry for the delay in getting back to you. I just wanted to, before I made any comments on this, I wanted to go through all the footage that you sent, so each club that you sent, just to make sure that the pattern is predictable throughout. So the initial question obviously related to the differences between your 7-iron and your 5 wood. I think we were chatting about that on WhatsApp, about the problems you're experiencing. The shot that you hit on the left-hand side with your 5 wood didn't look all that bad. You do mention that when you're out on the course, things get far worse than they are in the range. That's to be expected. The lie's more uneven, a little bit less forgiving for bottoming out slightly behind the ball, etc. And also any tendencies that we have out on the range will tend to be just a little bit more magnified when we get out on the golf course. So that's basically what's happening. The pattern that you demonstrate here, with the 7-iron versus the 5 wood is consistent throughout your set. The longer the club, the more exaggerated the tendencies become, and the bigger impact they have on the outcome of the shot because of the ball's relationship to the centre of the arc, i.e. the lead shoulder. So if we go in here, I've put some lines on already. Apologies if it looks a little bit small when you're viewing this, but the footage you sent, I can only zoom in so much. So for future reference, if you can be a little bit closer when you're videoing, that would help with some of the details. But you get the bulk of it through this anyway. You can see there's a certain shaft lean at address in both instances. For me, the ball position with your 5 wood is a little bit too far back. I would like to see the shaft sitting slightly more vertical. Not vertical, but certainly leaning forward a little bit less. Moving that ball a little bit nearer to that lead shoulder would help you get a little bit better launch on it. Having said that, I'm reading between the lines here, but I feel that you're moving the ball back in an attempt to not top the golf ball. So ball forward a little bit, shaft a little bit less leaning forward with a 5 wood for future reference. What I'm going to do now is just go through some certain areas in the swing, so P1, P2, etc., and look at what's happening and some differences and similarities. The move away from the ball is very similar in both instances. The club ascends a little bit quicker with your 7-iron, which you'd expect. Now, the lead shoulder I'm going to come to shortly, but the first thing I want to talk about is that lead knee. In both instances, the lead knee tends to want to work merely towards the target line. Now, one of the things that's misrepresented, or misinterpreted from the book, is that they do talk about flexing the lead knee towards the target line because they're trying to get away from the idea of the lead knee just working in behind the ball. So as it's working in, it should be flexing forward. And what that's going to do in your case is facilitate a much better hip rotation, which in turn will free up that lead shoulder and the rest of your torso during your golf swing. So at the moment, both lead knees at P2 are just working towards the target line. If anything, the one with the 7-iron actually works a little bit towards the target line and the target, so it moves towards the target P1 to P2. If we then move up to P3, we can see that that lead knee isn't really moving in a great deal. In both instances, that's leading to the pelvis shifting off a little bit and the head moving outside the circle. It's severely restricting your ability to turn on a tilted angle. So as the lead knee works in and towards the target line, so the rotation of the pelvis or the rotation of the body will bring the knee in a certain amount. That will change from club to club. The flexing of the knee towards the target line will add the side bend that makes the turn more tilted. So the trajectory of the lead knee in reality is inwards and towards the target line. And so as it's moving in, it's moving towards the target line, inwards and forwards, inwards and forwards. And I'll send you a little image across that relates to that, so that you can see the differences in various knee conditions with different players. Just remind me on that via a little WhatsApp message at some point. As we then go to P4, star P3. I want to talk about this lead shoulder. We can see with the longer club, the lead shoulder trajectory tends to be a little bit more level and not working down quite as much. So you need to consider that. Now, it will be a little bit more level because you're not as over the ball, but it still needs to work down a little bit more than it is doing. Now, because it's a bigger club, you're trying to create a bigger shoulder turn. The emphasis is on turning. The lead knee is not facilitating a tilted turn, and as such, if the lead knee doesn't go down and forwards or in and forwards towards the target line, the pelvis can't turn on a tilted angle correctly, and the lead shoulder can't work down sufficiently. With a 7-iron, it looks like it's working more down than it does with a 5-wood, but it's still not working down enough, and there's evidence of that when we see the head moving out the circle. If we then continue to P4, we see again that the head is moving out of the circle quite considerably, a little bit more with the 5-wood than it does with the 7-iron. Again, you'd expect that. You can see the pelvis is shifted off the golf ball too much. You can see the lead knee now is starting to come in more. At some point it sort of has to, but we just need to make that more incremental. I'm going to give you a very simple drill that you can do at the end of this video that's going to help with everything that we're talking about in the backswing, and then give you some thoughts on the downswing. So, as we start down, the lead shoulder starts to work up quicker. So we go from the white dot to the blue dot now with your 5-wood than it does with your 7-iron. So the shoulder differential is greater with the 5-wood than it is with the 7-iron. Now, to a degree, you'd expect to see that because you're hitting the ball a little bit harder, you're extending a little bit more, you're hitting it later in the arc because the ball's a little bit further forward, etc., etc. I'm just going to match those two up at impact. But we can't afford for that lead shoulder to climb too high too soon. Now, the other thing, I'm just going to clear all the lines away now. What we've got is a situation where we've got a lead shoulder that's climbing. So as the centre of the arc gets further away from the ball, the wrist angles need to come out to widen the arc sufficiently to hit the shot the way you want to and get the strike on it that you need. What you're doing is you're increasing the shaft lean considerably for a 5-wood as you raise the shoulder. Now, as you raise the shoulder, you need to get rid of the wrist angles. If you increase the wrist angles, you're raising the base of the arc. So you're bringing the base of the arc closer to you as you push the handle forward. Now, again, if we look at this, we've got a lead shoulder with the 7-iron that's not raising as fast, and we've got angles in the wrist that are very similar to what we've got with a 5-wood. Now, if you suddenly raise this shoulder higher and keeping those wrists as they are, instead of the base of the arc being down at the golf ball, it would start to move up above it. So the idea of the shaft leaning forward and the trail wrist flying wedge is fine, but it's not the same for every club. So we need to start recovering the shaft and matching up the lead shoulder to the amount of shaft bend or shaft lean that we have at impact. So from an impact perspective, what I want you to work on is when you go to the range, you don't hit balls doing this, but before shots, go to P4. I'll talk about the backswing shortly. Go to P4, and then from P4, stop at P4, and then return the shaft to impact and have the shaft sitting vertically, not leaning forward. Now, this is only relevant to your fairway woods and your driver. It's not relevant to your iron shots. With an iron, you want the shaft leaning forward because you want to hit it with negative loft. With the driver, you want the shaft vertical or leaning forward less because you're trying to hit it with a more positive loft. So when practicing at P7, swing to P4 and stop, and then go down to P7 and try and feel like the lead arm and the shaft are lined up. So you're learning to recover the shaft a little bit more rather than continuously pushing the handle forward coming into impact. Now, the other thing that you tend to want to do with both clubs, to be fair, is you tend to want to turn through these balls really, really fast. So you see how quickly the chest goes from facing the camera to facing the target. Now, that's not really conducive to hitting out at the ball in an appropriate manner. So I want you to work on a certain feel here now, and the feel is from P6 to P9. So one drill that I want you to do with your 5 wood primarily is swing to P4, go down to P7, lining up the lead arm and the shaft, so you're recovering the shaft. Do that a couple of times, then hit a ball. You should get more of a sweeping attack on the ball, start seeing the ball flighted up in the air for you. That needs to be done with the ball a little bit further forward in the stance. What I need you to spend a bit of time doing with all clubs is making a few swings where you just go back to sort of waist level and through to chest height. Swing back to waist level. As you come through to chest height, feel like your chest is going to keep facing the camera. So if you've got a face on camera like you've got here, feel like, the chest is going to keep facing the camera so that the rate of rotation starts to calm down, allowing the extension and the slide to do the job and allowing you to hit out at that ball a more appropriate amount. So that's just an isolation exercise, isolating that impact interval from 6 to 9. From 6 to 9, every player is turning, extending and sliding. You're turning a little bit too much throughout that movement. So again, just isolating some shots. Doesn't matter what club you use. You can use driver or 8-iron or 7-iron. Doesn't matter. Swing back to waist level so that you're going from an approximate position of P6 and then through to the chest height. So you're approximately P9 and keep the chest facing the camera for longer. Now, in regards to P4, what I'd like you to work on, and this doesn't need to be done at the range, but once you've done it a few times, it becomes a really good visual. Take both swings back to the setup position. So, if you were to take your setup with the outer edge of your lead foot up against the wall, adopt your grip and your posture. So again, we don't want a club when we're doing this. And go from P1 to P4. Now, if you look at what happens in relation to your spine or your back, the whole of your back, from P1 to P4, it moves further away from the wall, doesn't it? So what I want you to do is I want you to practice getting from P1 to P4 and have the back move closer to that wall as you go back. So from a good P1, feel like you're moving the back nearer to the wall at P4. You won't have a club in your hand, so you don't need to worry about hitting the wall. And what that's going to facilitate is a much earlier side bend. So the lead shoulder working down is the primary reason why you stay centered early in the takeaway. As the swing progresses and you go beyond 2.5, the primary sort of mechanism for keeping you centered is the extension. So you're turning, extending and side bending all the way to the top, and that lead shoulder working down and the knees changing flex has a different impact P1 to P2, 2.5 than it does 2.5 to 4. Now, the act of making some movements where you feel the back of your back moving closer to that wall will facilitate a completely different movement for you. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to send me some footage of you doing that drill. Film it from face on, lead foot up against the wall, no club in your hands, make some backswings. Feel that the back of your back is going to move nearer to the wall as you go from P1 to P4. Don't think about how you're going to do it, just do it. And then as you filmed it, or when you film it, before you do any major practice on it, send me the footage across. I'll do your little comparison and I'll go through the differences so you can see the benefits of it. Okay, thanks for the footage. Great feedback as always, and look forward to watching this one progress over the coming weeks.